And welcome, connection, culture, and student achievement. And in looking at the AB 130 bill that y'all may be familiar with, that deals with the work that you do with students, especially kind of in that independent study platform, it says that teachers need to possess the attributes that allow them to develop close bonds that foster pupil success. And that is what drove us putting this training together today. To kick things off, I would like for each of you to share an image that represents what connection means to you. It can be an image, or if you want to use the sticky note, you can certainly use that, write a word or words that represent what connection means to you. And I'll give folks a few minutes here. Feeling seen and heard. That is awesome. Building rapport. Fantastic. Oh, we got an image. Trust. Beautiful. Absolutely all of those things. People are connected. Yes. Fantastic. Connection. What's interesting is that all of these things represent connection, but connection can feel different to each of us, right? Because we're each individuals, and there are certain things that allow us to feel seen and heard. And when we don't feel seen and heard, we can feel disconnected. When we talk about connection, and a lot of the ways that y'all described it basically dealt with relationships, right? Relationships are extremely important. We all know that in education, that relationships are important, but there is a correlation between relationships and loneliness. And what I like to highlight here is that just because we are around people, we can be around people, but it doesn't mean we feel connected, right? You can be lonely if you're in a room full of people, but just feel like you're in a place where you don't relate, where you aren't seen, where you aren't heard. And so when we look at relationships and the importance of establishing these connections, relationships reduce loneliness and increase emotional well-being. I want for y'all to take a minute and think about why relationships are important. Why relationships are important. Think about the relationships in your life and why is it that they're important. It helps us to feel that we belong, right? It helps us to feel understood. It helps us to feel accepted, right? Where we aren't just lonely and feeling emotionally vulnerable, but we actually feel that there is a sense of well-being that we can have connecting with another person. Casual interactions in the classroom or in daily errands and interactions are a way to help us to reduce loneliness and increase emotional well-being. In addition, deeper connections or friendships allow us to reduce loneliness and increase emotional well-being. And then finally, mentor-mentee roles, right? Feeling that we're a part of something, feeling that we're being invested in, help us to reduce loneliness and increase our emotional well-being. Next, we have opportunity, right? And there are opportunities that present themselves every day, but oftentimes we can get caught up kind of in the rhythm of our work that we don't recognize them, or we think that there have to be these big opportunities or grand gestures that are required. And the fact is, small connections, right, that we can make allow for space to develop closer relationships with students and with our coworkers. Sometimes, though, and I don't know if y'all can relate to this, but I certainly can, there are times where an opportunity is missed, or maybe we step into an opportunity in a way that isn't beneficial. And it's important when it comes to establishing connection and building relationships with kids that there's always opportunity to repair and recover from an unwanted interaction, right? Or something that we just don't feel went the way that we wanted it to go. I'll give you an example, and this is coming from my work with kids in a private day school setting. They were aggressive and violent, and public school just couldn't manage them. And there was a student that got caught with contraband one day, and he wanted for me to make an exception and not report it. And I said, I can't have the conversation. I'm having to report you, and it ended up creating a rift with this particular student. But the issue actually wasn't that I reported him necessarily. The issue was that I didn't take the time to listen to him. Right, it was cut and dry, and so he felt that he wasn't seen and he wasn't heard. And as I reflected on that, and as I met with him later on, I realized that what I thought he wanted to do was try and talk me out of reporting the contraband. But what he really wanted to do was explain what it is that he did, why it is that he messed up, and to develop a plan moving forward of how he could change a situation at home that this wouldn't happen again. And so, I was able to repair that relationship, but I had to kind of reflect on what it was that was going on with that particular student and then be willing to hear him out. So opportunity makes a difference. In addition, and there's data that supports this time and time again, but being connected to a positive and supportive adult increases feelings of safety, improves academic outcomes, and decreases the likelihood of violence. I spent some time working for a safety and security company, and one of the interesting pieces of data that we found as we were looking at school shooters in particular is that 95% of these students, regardless of age, that ended up committing violent acts against others in school, they reported that they didn't have a single healthy and appropriate connection with a staff person at the school. And so being connected and having a supportive relationship with adults is extremely important. You might be that one relationship, right? And so it just really emphasizes the need for these connections. And then finally, and data that we're seeing now, we've been so focused on working with kids, but data that we're seeing now actually says that connections can help staff feel better connected. It can help staff feel that they aren't dealing with loneliness, or to help them to recognize feelings of loneliness that they might be dealing with and that might be impacting their work. So relationships matter. As we go to slide 6, I'm wanting for you to think about how you were connected, okay? And specifically, what do some of those connections look like? Rather than us break into groups, because I don't know that we're going to have time to do that and get to some of the other breakout groups. If there are people that would like to come off mute and share, if there are people that would like to put a sticky note here on this slide 6 screen that talks about different connections or different relationships that you have, feel free to do that. I know for me, one connection that's very important to me is my connection with my faith body, right, or church. So that is a connection that is important to me. What about y'all? Something else that y'all feel is a connection in your life? Anyone at all? Common interests, family, those are fantastic.
I think
Anyone
that
else?
people one works with are connections because they provide support.
You are absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And that is an important connection, because if you think about it, we oftentimes spend more time with those work connections than we do with any other connection that we have, right? 40 hours of our week oftentimes is spent with these work connections. Um, Anyone else? Family, friends, teacher? Well, that's fantastic. No, these are all great answers. So it seems that there are a number of ways that we can be connected, and that y'all are connected. Christian fellowship, that's great. Outside of work, coworkers, friends. And you know what? I love that, because the relationships that we form or the connections that we make in one area of our life can transition or be applied to other areas of our life. You're absolutely correct. As we look at slide 7, I want to talk about the practice of connecting. Connections don't just happen, and listening and good verbal skills can allow us to connect through communication, but it's only half the battle. When we look at true connection, and if you think about the connections that you all just mentioned on the previous slide, true connection requires respect. How many people do you feel connected to and disrespected by at the same time? Those things I don't think can coexist. Not as a habit that you feel disconnected by or disrespected by somebody. That's not a connection that's going to last. Next, and somebody mentioned this, sharing similar interests, right? That is something that helps us to connect with someone else, caring about someone's personal interests. It's amazing that I can be in conversation with somebody, and inevitably this happens more in guy groups maybe than it does in women's groups, but I don't want to stereotype here. But guys can oftentimes start talking about sports pretty quick as an element of conversation, and teams get thrown out there. And I can meet somebody for the first time and hear that they're a Georgia Bulldog fan or that they're a Chicago Bears fan, and I immediately have a connection with them. Immediate, right? I don't know them from Adam, but I have a connection because there is a shared experience or a personal interest, right, that we have in common. Shared experiences and values is another one that really helps us to form connections. A sincere interest in helping people grow and succeed. And as teachers, as you consider your why, okay, that thing that kind of got you into the field of education, I would imagine that you have an interest in helping students grow and in helping students succeed. And when students demonstrate that interest in becoming better and learning, I think that's an automatic connection that you have with them, but it also is a connection that you can have with your peers. The ability to empathize is really an important one. Anytime I'm going through a hard time, somebody that comes alongside me and just seems to get where I am, right? They seem to know what it is to walk in my shoes. That is an immediate connection that's established with them. And while disclosure has been frowned upon a lot in the field of education and actually in the field of mental health in general, I think that sometimes disclosing things about ourselves allows us to be able to better empathize and connect with students. Finding value in others, and specifically not focusing on ourselves, but prioritizing getting to know about others, asking questions about others, making it not about us, but about others. All of these are really important elements in the practice of connecting. So now that we know how to connect, how do we connect with students? I know that many of you, the model that is used at Learn for Life is a very unique one. It's an independent study model. Some of you might have students that are coming into your classroom. Some of you might be working with students virtually, kind of as a weekly thing. But it's important that no matter the environment or no matter the way that it's structured, that we are able to connect with students. And so feel free to put a sticky note on here about maybe how you specifically connect with students. I'm going to go through a few things that we have found that allows us, whether in person or virtually, to better connect with students. And the first one is one-on-one communication and interactions, right? Being able to, even in a group setting, make a one-on-one connection with someone. If you'll think back a few minutes ago, as people were entering the room, I addressed them by name. Even though we're in a group format, I'm wanting to make a one-on-one connection with each person that's in the room. And that includes eye contact when you're in person, right? But it also can be eye contact or gestures or smiles when you're in a group format on Zoom. I know that y'all can't see when I'm specifically looking at each of you on Zoom, but I am when I address you, and it's just It's a great way to kind of make that connection with a student. In addition, individualized assignments. And what I specifically mean here are there are assignments that will allow a student to kind of be themselves, right? Things that allow them to express themselves. And that's a great way to make a connection with a student. In addition, rituals of connection are extremely important. It's not that structure isn't important. Structure is very important, but rituals can allow you to do things that students can come to expect. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But rituals allow kids to engage in something and feel a part of something that happens each and every day. Y'all go through more rituals probably than you realize. And so be mindful about how you incorporate rituals into your work with kids as a way of connecting with them. Learning about students' out of school interests. I think one person mentioned in the previous slide that doing things with their coworkers outside of work really help them to form strong bonds and connections. It's the same with the kids that we work with, right? Learning about the things that they're interested in. Finding out that a kid is a part of the school basketball team and then connecting with them over that, or maybe attending a soccer game that you know one of your students is participating in. Out of school interests are great ways to strengthen that in-school bond. And then that kind of leads us into those extracurricular activities. I can remember one teacher that I had that drove an hour to be a part of a math competition that I was involved in high school. And that meant the world to me, that they would take their own time and come and cheer us on in a math competition. You will be surprised at what impact you can make by taking an interest in students outside of school extracurricular activities. So things that y'all have done that may have created connections with students. If anybody wants to post something on here, is there a kind of a neat or unique thing that someone in here maybe you've done similar to my math my what was it, a math competition story that you've done to connect with one of your students? I like remembering details that they've shared prior to that gives us fodder to connect with them.
Yeah,
Attending soccer and basketball games, awesome.
I was gonna say too, going with that one, I think just remembering if they had a job interview that they had spoke to you about, like, hey, how'd the job interview go? You kind of like mentioning that first and remembering that detail to show that you're kind of stepping out and remembering and caring about what they told you to build that trust.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It shows that you're listening and that you care. And oftentimes, kids just want to know that somebody cares about them. We don't know what's going on with them outside of the classroom. We don't know what the home environment is like. From what I understand, y'all have a lot of students that probably come from very unsupportive or unstructured environments outside of school, and y'all might be that stability that just helps them feel seen and cared about. So that is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Connecting with students is important. As we go to slide 9, it's important that we remember there's always a message in the way a person treats you, and there's always a message in the way that you treat students. Okay. As adults, we have to be very careful how we're interpreting the messages, right, that kids are sending us. But we have to be even more important about what messages we're sending out. What message are you sending to your students? Or what message would your students say they hear from you? To the gentleman that just shared about following up if a student mentions they have a job interview, the message that you sent that student is that you remembered and you cared, not only that they mentioned it to you, but that you're curious about how it went, right? The message that you sent was that they're important and that what's going on in their life is important. What message and you can use this as a rhetorical question, but I think it's one that we need to ask ourselves frequently, right? What messages are your students hearing? As we go to slide 10, I want you to think about this statement and put a check mark on here with the pen or a sticky note or an X, right? Whether you agree or disagree, respectively. But connection drives culture, and a positive connection is going to produce a positive culture. Negative connections are going to produce a negative culture, and no connection is going to produce chaos. Do you agree or disagree? Check mark. Yep. Yep. And the no connection driving chaos. If you have ever been in a classroom that has zero personal engagement, has zero interaction at all, there's a unique feeling about that. That can seem somewhat chaotic. Now, I have a couple people that have put X's, and if you can unmute, I would love to hear how you are approaching this idea. Anybody put an X that did not agree with this? You can also put it in the chat if you wish. But as a general rule here, the type of connection is going to determine the type of culture as a rule, and no connection at all is going to be extremely chaotic.
I'll speak to that. I mean, I agree that positive connection is positive culture, but I don't necessarily agree that like if there's a negative connection, I'm not going to create a negative culture. If they don't want to agree with us, they don't like what we're doing, they don't like what we're still going to keep the vibe positive, but that's on them to, if they're coming in our classroom and they're negative and they don't want to talk to us or they don't want to do their work, like we're still going to be positive and happy and try to get them to, do everything we can to create that positive culture. So
I agree with you 100%. I think that there's a semantic thing here. One negative student, right? If there's a kid that just has a negative vibe or that you aren't able to make a positive connection with, right? You can avoid making a negative connection with them. The way that they interpret it is on them, okay? But if you have a classroom where the majority of the connection in that is positive, right? As a rule, you're going to be able to sustain a positive culture. If the majority of the connection in there, both your connection with students and students' connection with themselves is negative, then there's going to be a lack of trust. There's going to be a lack of accountability. It's going to be more of a negative feel. And then no connection at all, right? Everybody's doing their thing. And it's not that it's dangerous. It's just that it's a free for all, right? But I hear exactly what you're saying, and we're saying the same thing, right? Going to slide 11. What word or phrase would you use to describe the teaching environment that you create, either live or virtual? Take a sticky note. What word or phrase would you use to describe the teaching environment? Or if you wish to unmute and you can kind of verbalize it, I'm open to that as well. What word or phrase, the teaching environment that you're trying to create? Enthusiastic. Yes, that's awesome. Fun, safe.
Sure.
Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to say a safe environment where students can come and feel welcome and safe.
That's great. Safe environments are extremely important, right? Not to go into the Maslow before Bloom argument, which as teachers, y'all have probably heard that, but kids need to feel safe before they can engage in learning. Encourage or productive. These are all fantastic, right? Some days we do better than others, right? We can't control how the kids are going to receive that, but we can be very intentional in what environment we're trying to create and what environment we're trying to support. But it's important that we're intentional, right, in the environment that we try to create. Cheerleader, I love it. Consistent, man, that's extremely, these are all fantastic. And if you think about classroom environments that have these elements, that environment is likely going to be positive. If you look at classroom environments without these elements, then that is likely going to be a much more challenging environment to operate in. So now that we're talking about culture and the importance of culture and the way that connection drives culture, let's look at ways that we can influence the teaching environment. There are 5 elements that we highlight that are going to help us influence it. We can't create it all by ourselves, right? But we can create the expectation, and we can certainly be intentional in how we are influencing the learning environment. And to begin, we want to nurture positive relationships with all students, right? That's the goal. Is it a reality? No, it's not. But we can be intentional about trying to nurture positive relationships with all students. As an example, I used to, as kids were coming in the building and I was in a position where I could do this, I would greet every single kid in the morning. And, you know, in our school, it was a K through 12 school, kids as young as 5 and as old as 22, because that's when they age out of special education. And I would greet every single kid, eye contact and a good morning. And I was raised in the sir or ma'am kind of Georgia environment. And so it was good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. Right? Every day. Most of the kids wouldn't respond, but I wanted to make sure that I was showing up and trying to be positive, right? And setting the tone and nurturing positive relationships. In addition to setting the tone, be approachable, right? Be approachable, but don't force the interaction. There are some kids, as y'all have probably seen, they don't want to interact. I had kids that would completely ignore me walking in, even though I was polite and I was kind and I was intentional. And that's absolutely fine. I don't know what they were dealing with. I don't know what kind of morning they had. But I'm there, I showed up, and I'm approachable, but I'm not going to force the interaction. And then finally, always model the expectation. I was really big on rules. And so if I am rude, if I'm ignoring people as they come in, if I'm quick to react or judge, I'm setting an expectation that probably isn't the best. And as kids start to act in kind, I'm going to be in a very difficult position to redirect when I've been modeling negative interactions or negative behavior. So we always want to model the expectation, even if it isn't demonstrated back to us. Next, we want to promote positive peer relationships. And really, the first step in doing that is how we are interacting with the kids, right? We're setting the expectation. But in promoting positive peer relationships, we want to provide opportunities for kids to develop positive relationships instead of obstacles. There are challenges in the virtual environment. I understand that, right? But if there are obstacles that we are putting in the way, and what that would be in a virtual environment, you know better than I do. Maybe it's requiring cameras to be on, right? Which is going to set up a power struggle with people. Maybe it's not allowing time or opportunities for people to share things they believe or things they think or ways they've been impacted by certain things, right? Providing opportunities instead of obstacles is key. In addition, respecting differences, right? In how kids engage and accept relationships with others. Y'all probably deal with kids that have been traumatized. You probably deal with kids that have just had a very difficult morning, right? Everybody has a story, and we have to respect and understand that kids, they're going to be differences in the way that they are treated and the way that they've been treated, and we want to accept that as a part of their individual story. By us doing that, that allows for kids to feel seen and heard, and maybe even establish connections with their peers that have similar stories. And then finally, acknowledge effort no matter how small. The smallest act can oftentimes be extremely difficult for a student, especially one that has minimal family support, that's been a part of the juvenile justice system, that has just been in trouble in the past or is distrustful of adults. And so I always look to acknowledge the smallest amount of effort, because I don't know how difficult it was for that student to do that, right? And if I don't acknowledge the fact that they're trying, it's almost guaranteed that they'll stop, right? It's almost guaranteed that they'll stop, or they certainly won't respond to encouragement from me to work hard if I'm not acknowledging the efforts that they're making. So promote positive peer relationships. Next slide, slide 15, define educational rules and norms, right? Rules and norms are important. We have to have rules. Otherwise, everybody is just kind of free for all doing their thing, and it's completely crazy and chaotic, right? Rules should be simple, specific, positive, and supported by student input. Supported by student input, I want to highlight that for a minute, because this is extremely important, that students feel like they have a voice when it comes to educational rules and norms. When we get not just feedback from students, when we are willing to listen to them, but then they start to see that we put elements of that in practice. Maybe not every rule that the student gives, but we take time to listen, and then we start looking at ways that we can implement some of these things. It creates buy-in for the kid, which is extremely important. We also want to make sure that the rules and the norms are measurable, observable, and visibly displayed, right? Saying things like kids need to be good in class, right? You can't measure good because it's really hard to define that, right? Kids need to be respectful, right? We understand what that means, but the way that respect is defined and demonstrated for them at home might be completely different. And so we want to make sure that we're specific and that we're doing things that allow students to know and understand the expectation. And then finally, it needs to be consistently enforced and periodically reviewed. Any rule that isn't consistently enforced is a suggestion, right? And what will happen is you'll enforce it with one student and then you won't enforce it the next because it's inconsistently enforced. That makes it personal to the student. And if you have students that are aggressive, now that is a personal, the kids would say diss to me. I don't know what the most accurate word is now, right? But you've made it personal with that kid. And that's where you really start to get a lot of pushback from students. Next slide, 16, establish a routine. I've kind of mentioned the importance of routines, but things need to be predictable. Things need to be construed in such a way that the environment is safe, secure, and comfortable. And things need to allow opportunities for meaningful support and instruction, right? Whether virtual or in person, I understand that that means different things. If it means that you're virtually teaching a class and you message a student individually, like I can send a group message out or I can message one of y'all individually. And that's not only a personal connection, right? But it allows for meaningful conversation or specific feedback to be given. Establishing routines and knowing that you're connected with your kids is extremely important in developing that teamwork culture. And then finally, slide 17, observe and evaluate. We aren't always going to get it right, and that's fine. We don't want to get stuck in this kind of place of analysis paralysis, right? Where we're trying to develop the perfect structure and the perfect rules and the perfect expectations, right? That's why we establish something with feedback from students, we model it, and then we want to observe and evaluate. Now, evaluating it is important if it's consistently applied. If it's not consistently applied, then your data isn't going to be sound, okay? But assuming that we are consistently setting and enforcing the expectation, observe and evaluate it. Recognize what's working and what isn't, and adjust it. This demonstrates to kids that there's always an opportunity to change course. There's always an opportunity to right a wrong. There's always an opportunity to recognize when we just don't do something right and then make it right. A great way to model for your students what it is that's going to help them to grow and develop. We want to be patient and supportive of the change process. If if some of these things that we're talking about that are important in establishing culture are going to be new ideas or things that maybe are going to be more consistently enforced, it's going to take time. Anytime you set a boundary or limit that hasn't been consistently enforced, people are going to push against it, right? They don't know if this is something that's going to stick. And so be patient, right? Support the process. It takes time, but the rewards are great. And then as I mentioned, get that periodic feedback from students as a way of strengthening their buy-in. They can set the rules and expectations along with your guidance, but also let them be a part of the is this working, right? And refining or adjustment process. So as we go to slide 18, this is a case study. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break y'all into some learning groups. Let me see. I'm going to break y'all into breakout rooms. Go ahead and read through the scenario, and you'll see the 3 questions that are at the bottom. What are some examples of connection that you notice? What expectation has this teacher created for the students? And then are there opportunities for additional connections based on the routine that's been established? We'll take about 3 or 4 minutes. Y'all get some ideas down, and then we'll come back and review. So breakout rooms we'll create, and I'll see y'all in about 5 minutes. All right, I think everybody is back. Who would like to start from each group? I'd love for each group to maybe answer one of the questions. That might be a great way to kind of break this down. So who from that group can tell us what some examples of connection were that you noticed in the scenario?
I think the eye contact was a big one. The eye contact, definitely checking in with them in the morning, having that energy, whether they get like hugs or fist bumps or just the checking in, I think.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great opportunity for for Miss Jacobs to kind of gauge where each kid was, right? But yeah, eye contact, greeting, individualized kind of handshake or fist bump or whatever. Multiple examples of connection there. Absolutely. Thanks very much. Okay, the second question: what expectation or expectations has Miss Jacobs created for her students?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. So definitely Ms. Jacobs' expectation was that she had threshold and she greeted her students every day. And then especially that she had that saying, I really like that, you could be anything you choose to be, but I'm glad you choose to be with us. So a lot of those students, expected that from her. They expected that statement from her, and that continually a regular threshold is what kind of gave them that great rapport and the great connections.
What's interesting is that I've seen students before kind of, when you go into that kind of saying at the beginning of the day or some kind of a routine, kids will kind of laugh or, joke about it or whatever. But what I found is if when you pay attention, there's something that anchors them with that, right? It's a way that there is an expectation. They know what to expect. They're not caught off guard. And there is an element of safety and expectation there that can be extremely powerful. So opportunities for additional connections based on Miss Jacobs' routine. And let me see. Is there anybody that'd like to share for additional connections?
One of the things that we discussed was allowing the opportunity for students to also greet each other.
Mhm.
That way they can establish new connections or make new friends, and also gives them the opportunity to, have a choice too, if they want to interact or not with others.
I love that. Go ahead.
That was it.
Oh, okay. No, I love that. Right. We talked about the importance of those peer connections, And it's awesome that you picked up on that opportunity, not just right for connections that are being demonstrated in this case study with the teacher and student, but are there opportunities for additional connections based on the routine, and kids being able to connect with one another absolutely is important. One that is important that I've utilized before as part of my kind of connecting with kids at the beginning of the day routine is I get to see kids that might not present the way they normally present, right? And that gives me a nugget of information to where I might check in on them one on one, right? Or I might observe them a little bit to make sure that everything's okay. This is true for kids that are normally happy and energetic and come in kind of quiet and sullen. But I've also found this to be beneficial for kids that are normally quiet and sullen and they come in energetic, right? Anything that you see that's a deviation from the norm can be an opportunity for you to connect with that kid. It's not that anything's good or bad, it's an opportunity to establish a one-on-one connection. And Miss Jacobs' routine allows her to do that. So those are awesome examples going through this case study. So for this last scenario, what I'd like for y'all to do is screen capture this. I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute. Screen capture the last scenario, and then think about how you would answer the questions from this particular case study. Okay, about Mr. Griffin. You'll see that one of them, the first one, was kind of a positive culture, a positive environment. Mr. Griffin, he has a different vibe, right? That's kind of going through the classroom that he's created. And so I'd like for each of y'all to think about how you would answer those questions for Mr. Griffin in his classroom. Just something that as you're thinking about the environment that you're connecting or that you're creating for your students, right? You're thinking about the culture that you're really wanting to establish, right? The message that you're sending. It's really important for us to be intentional about the things that we do, right? The way that we're communicating. We're sending a message, right? Is it a positive or negative one? And then we're always evaluating the work that we're doing with students. So I have a few minutes if there are any questions that anybody has about anything that we've covered. I certainly appreciate the participation that I've gotten. Such a great group. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I just wanted to remind everyone for additional support for these kinds of things, eTherapy. Also, you can go to our Equip platform and create a profile. We'll be sending that out to you, and you can go in there, and there's all kinds of great resources, modules that kind of reinforce a lot of what we're doing today. I'll see if I can put that in the chat for you guys as
That's
well.
awesome, Kathy.
Just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for the content and the presentation. And sometimes it is a little challenging. It's difficult because, for example, I have a student that he's always on edge, regardless of what day it is. He since he gets into the door, he's already uh, like on the edge. So
Mhm.
just I think consistency is key, and just try to be graceful and not take things personal because
Absolutely.
yeah, students go through a lot as well. Thank you.
So thank you for sharing. And if you have a home environment that is chaotic and they don't know what to expect, home is supposed to be a safe place, right? And if home isn't safe, then how can a student expect anywhere to be safe? And so I'm really glad that you brought that up. Being consistent, being available, those are things for kids that are probably products of trauma, whether incidental trauma or complex trauma, right? It's really important to keep those things into consideration. So thank you for sharing. Anybody else? And thank y'all so much for attending. Again, thank you for completing the survey. Y'all are awesome. 1 week down, 4 more weeks to go. I appreciate y'all helping us kick off this training series. I hope that you have a beautiful Monday, and hopefully I will get to see you again here in the next few weeks. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Great. Thanks.
Y'all take
Yeah.
care.
Thanks a lot.